For the last 3 years, Mr. Burghardt has been the European Commission's head of delegation in Washington, D.C., which makes him essentially the European Union's ambassador to the United States. We're very privileged to have the ambassador here on campus, and I hope you'll join me in giving a warm BYU welcome to the EU's ambassador, Mr. Guenter Burghardt.
Thank you very much for your very warm and enthusiastic welcome here. And let me begin with sincere thanks to Professor Peterson, first of all, Professor Ringer, and Professor Jacobi for their invitation and for their gracious hospitality Rita and I have received as your guest over the past days. Professor Jacobi has gone well beyond the call of duty as our host. We have almost become a team over the past 4 days, a team of pioneers trying to find the way through the wilderness and the beauties of this country. And at this point, I'm sure that Wade probably knows my views well enough in order to deliver this address himself. But if he would do, it would deprive me of a good discussion with you here. And therefore, what I'm proposing to do is to deliver my academic lecture, which means that you have to have a prepared text. Normally, I don't like that, but this is the rules. The advantage of that is that you will get the text later on, and you don't have to take too many notes, and so you can concentrate in listening. But the bad news is that I will have to read some of what I want to say to you. Let me say that it is a great pleasure for everyone here to participate in these ambassadorial lectures, which honor, as I read, the legacy of David M. Kennedy, who was a former U.S. Treasury Secretary and university benefactor to this university. And this lecture series celebrates the many international links that have been established at Brigham Young University. I know that at a very young age, many of you already have or will soon travel overseas to live in Europe or other places in the world. And by learning other languages and living in another country, you gain an understanding of what life is like for other people. And this is really important because it gives
of the European Commission as its executive body and embryonic European government holds responsibilities. It has been said that in politics a day is a long time and a week is an eternity. After my own increasingly lengthy career as a European public servant, more than 30 years, however, I have learned that some things in the political arena are truly constant. In my work, the chief constant is the importance of European and American partnership. Economically, politically, and strategically, the EU-US relationship is indispensable to furthering our shared values in a more prosperous and peaceful world. Let me just say that sentence, which I always like to pronounce in order to underline that. There's no more important strategic partnership around the globe than the one between the United States and the emerging New Europe on the other side of the Atlantic. A second closely related constant is the nature of the world itself. It is increasingly complex. You know this from your own study and experience. Great history-altering successes, such as the end of the Cold War and the expansion of democracy, have been followed in rapid succession by new challenges, such as the need to address global terrorism. I believe that the EU-US partnership is the key to answering many of those challenges, and that we live really in an era which we call of globalization. This may surprise those of you who have read that the transatlantic partnership
is in peril, that Americans live on Mars while Europeans live on Venus. I believe we still live on the same planet, by the way. And I believe that the facts speak for themselves. No other with shared common goals covering the global agenda. But sometimes it goes a little bit like the old saying by Winston Churchill. When Winston Churchill was asked what the problems are in the UK-US relationship, his answer was, "We are divided by a common language." Now, my answer would be that the problems between the European Union and the United States is because we are divided by common objectives. But we share the common heritage in the European Enlightenment, which has been one of the sources of the war for independence of this country, and the body of ideas that emerged from that period to inform our understanding of democracy and individual rights. Part of my job in Washington is making these truths, which can be blurred in the day-to-day to and fro of the political process, self-evident to our American partners. Europe is changing. For many of your ancestors, the old Europe was the continent to escape from, to America, the new world, in search of a new future. Those who practiced the Mormon faith faced a further difficult journey within the United States, which led to the creation of this state of Utah and the founding of this great university. As a representative of the European Union, we are sort of pioneers as well, pioneering about the new Europe, and I'm proud to share some of our own newly found determination and dynamism, which will shortly include the peoples of the Central European future new member states to make Europe whole, free, and united. I hope you will appreciate it as a symbol that Europe is joining with the United States in a wholehearted defense of humanism, of openness, of tolerance, on which our societies are based. Because I don't want to monopolize our time together, let me briefly outline the key elements of two things I wanted to introduce to you. One is about the current transatlantic agenda, and the other part is about the historically important agenda now facing and taking form in Europe. And then I hope we can turn to some questions and comments. The EU and the US have a solid foundation for working together. The new transatlantic agenda, as we call it, was agreed in December 1995, and it provides both the menu and the organizing framework for our partnership. The general idea behind all that was the determination to reflect into a transatlantic relationship the changes which take place in Europe, and to the degree that those changes increase the European Union capabilities to base on that solid foundation a policy of partnership with the United States. And I don't have to recount here the many initiatives which were taken by the United States after the Second World War, from the Marshall Plan and from the very active support of many administrations for this exercise. Today you can read sometimes in the op-eds that the situation we face could be compared to the situation Harry Truman faced when the problem was how to face the threat from the Soviet Union. And his answer to that was to form alliances and to equip Europe, to allow it to equip itself with own capabilities and to work together with Europe to face this historic challenge. Now we have another historic challenge, which is called war on terrorism in this country. It's even called war much more here than it is called in Europe war. But it is the expression of a determination to face a new challenge. And the question is, what will the United States do? Do it the Truman style or do it in a different way? Now, I introduced the menu and organizing framework of the transatlantic partnership. Hours to go over, say that there are the determination to work on the basis of common values, to jointly address regional and global issues. Number 3, to manage the bilateral and multilateral aspects of our all-important economic relationship. And last but not least, number 4, to underpin all that through people-to-people dialogues between our civil societies, including many strands of that society, and of course, including the university communities on both sides of the Atlantic. And our office supports, for instance, 15 European Union centers in different American universities from the East Coast to the West Coast, who have decided to make the European Union a more systematic issue of their various academic activities. Much progress is made during the yearly transatlantic summits between our leaders, which means the President of the United States, the President of the European Council, and the President of the European Commission. So we are two on our side, facing the President of the U.S., who is accompanied by the most important members of his cabinet. Now, the last summit in May in Washington focused on the pursuit of terrorists and the fight against the root causes of terrorism. The post-September 11 agenda has re-energized and added a new dimension to our common agenda. The EU has joined the US to work closely in the areas of, and I'll give you a few examples, the areas of aviation and other transport security, police and judicial cooperation, denial of funds to terrorists, export controls, non-proliferation, travel document security, some of those issues which are very important for the day-to-day life of everybody here in the room when it comes to visa policies, for instance. With the US, we are currently negotiating an ambitious agreement on extradition and mutual legal assistance. Two symbols of this new aspect of the EU in its external relations are the opening of the European Police Europol liaison office in Washington, which happened very recently, and which is housed in our delegation premises, and the fact that Attorney General Ashcroft was in Europe last month to participate in a meeting of European ministers and a member of the European Commission dealing with internal security issues, which we call in our jargon justice and home affairs. The re-energized transatlantic agenda also applies to our joint efforts in addressing regional challenges. I can only enumerate a few of them here. Afghanistan, where we are cooperating to ensure that the democratic government can take command of that country again. As the biggest donors of reconstruction aid and the largest contributors to the International Stabilization Force, European nations are fully sharing the burden of building a better future for Afghanistan, of nation building in this country. Nearby in Pakistan and India, the EU has joined the US in working towards a reduction in tensions and movement towards a peaceful resolution of differences. You know that some nuclear accidents could happen in that case if we manage badly that relationship. For the Middle East peace process, a very important subject, even more important for the Europeans partly than for the United States, because this region is so close to our region. The US and the EU are working closely together in the so-called Quartet, where the EU and the US are joined by the Secretary General of the United Nations and Russia. We agree on the basic parameters of a solution, which is two states living side by side. But we must forcefully and more actively translate vision into an operational roadmap in full respect for the legitimate interests and lives of both Israelis and Palestinians. Iraq is, of course, currently a subject of great importance in the United States and in Europe. There can be no doubt about the dictatorial nature of the regime led by Saddam Hussein and the threat it generates. The European Union has warmly welcomed President Bush's decision to deal with Iraq through the UN system. As a union, we believe this is by far the best and most effective way to take things forward. Working through the UN confers legitimacy and a sense of moral consensus on the actions that may be necessary to take. We agree on the need for full implementation of all UN resolutions, and we know that these days there is a negotiation about another resolution in order to give a very strong backing to that. Thanks in large part to transatlantic cooperation, hope has returned to the Balkans. The Balkans, a trouble spot which I have lived directly through days and nights when I was on the Brussels side. There the European Union has taken an increasingly active role. When we negotiated the Maastricht Treaty, we were almost bypassed by the events in Bosnia. And we negotiated the Amsterdam Treaty, we had the problem of the Kosovo. And each time the feeling was that we do too little too late on some of those issues. So this was a real ground for exercising the need on our side for acquiring more capabilities. One of the reasons the Balkans are one of the reasons of the decision to set up a peacekeeping force of 60,000, rapid reaction force as we call it, which should be from the beginning of next year operational in the field for a year and help the European Union to fulfill some of the tasks when it comes to peacekeeping and peacemaking, and show clearly that we will be able to substitute for United States resources for some of those areas of conflict. By the way, most recently, we have prevented 2 more wars in the Balkans. One which was about to happen between Serbia and Montenegro because of Montenegro's decision for more autonomy on even secession. And the other one in Macedonia between the Albanian ethnic population and the Macedonian Slavic ethnic population. And last but not least, the EU is projecting regional unity, stability and prosperity beyond its own enlargement to Central and Eastern Europe to the other parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. We have a whole toolbox of agreements in order to bind those countries to the powerhouse of the integration process, which is the European Union itself. Our agreements allow the establishment of partnerships, association, customs union, like the one with Turkey, free trade agreements, all short of full EU membership. And by this, the European Union's expanding zone of political and economic stability will ultimately extend to more than 1 billion people. This will encompass Russia and the other newly independent states, including the Europeans, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, including the Caucasus states and the Central Asian republics, together with the Balkans and the countries of the Mediterranean basin to the south and to the east. Now, among the fundamental questions, because all this was about regional issues, where we try to combine our forces. Beyond that, there are fundamental questions which arise 1 year after the September 11 attacks. And the question is, to which extent does the United States, or will the United States remain disposed to international cooperation on global issues? It is no secret that prior to 11 September, the new U.S. administration frustrated many in the EU because of unilateral departures from international commitments, such as the Kyoto Protocol on greenhouse gases or the International Criminal Court. And almost every month there was one agreement which was terminated on the U.S. side. And that was before September 11, 2001. The lessons of the past year must help us to become more focused on finding global solutions to global issues. We are global stakeholders. Let me just give you the example of pollution. We, the United States and the European Union together, consume 40% of the world's energy. So we are also responsible for 40% of the pollution, which goes hand in hand with that. So we cannot turn a blind eye to that issue, and we need to be stakeholders when it comes to global solutions. We do not wish to preach or lecture anybody when I'm saying that, but partners are needed, and international cooperation is essential. This is best exemplified, and by the way, undisputed, in the area of international economic relations. At the WTO Ministerial in Doha, we helped produce a comprehensive agenda for a new global trade round, aimed at addressing, in particular, many of the concerns raised by developing countries. At the UN Conference on Financing for Development in Monterrey, we both announced substantial increases in official development assistance. This momentum created by Doha and Monterrey was unfortunately not fully sustained at the recent World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, where the EU and the US differed on a number of issues, including target dates for the introduction of renewable energy resources. Some of the difficulty we face in working together at the multilateral level is based on our different approaches. The European Union is by its very nature inclined to seek and promote multilateral solutions to global problems. We know that multilateralism works. Our success is the result of multilateralism at work. Though the U.S. was responsible for creating much of the multilateral architecture that sustained and promoted democracy and the free market after the Second World War, from the United Nations system to the institutions of Bretton Woods, some here are now seen to be uncomfortable with such an approach. As a consequence, many commentators argue that a deep division has developed between Europe and the United States. I remain, for my part, optimistic. There is actually good reason to believe that Americans and Europeans agree on a great deal regarding global affairs. The most comprehensive survey ever made, and was made by the Chicago Foreign Affairs Council and the German Marshall Fund, of U.S. and European public attitudes, recently found that large majorities of Europeans and Americans support the use of military force to combat terrorism if we work together. In facing a world transformed, there is fundamental agreement regarding our friends, our enemies, and the need for both the European Union and the United States to play cooperative roles in world affairs. So a great deal of agreement does exist between our peoples, even if this is not always fully translated into the domestic political process. And all those who watch discussions about the renewal of the House of Representatives and senatorial seats in the Senate discover that international issues play a very little role, although the public cares a lot about it. Others cite tensions caused by the disparity between the military might of the United States compared to Europe and the rest of the world, and the need for Europe to effectively implement the European security and defense policy. That need is being addressed on the European side. Our headline goal of the ESDP, as the abbreviation goes, European Security and Defense Policy, which is this rapid reaction force I already talked about, will be, we hope, deployable from January of next year. And this is only a beginning. It is the beginning of focusing the less money which we are spending on defense compared to the United States on making our capabilities more flexible, more focused to the new threats out there and the new security issues. And we are not doing this only when it comes to military capabilities, but also when it comes to police. Because in many of those crisis regions, we discovered that after the military have done their job, the nation building really starts with establishing civilian police forces. And so therefore we are also putting up a capability of 5,000 police officers by 2003 for international missions of conflict prevention. I know from Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, that they really felt that there was a vacuum when it came to that part of the toolbox, and Europe will be able to fill some of it. So even if the United States, with their more than 400 billion a year, spend more than 2 times, almost 3 times of the 150 billion a year the European Union member states pay on defense, we can do a lot in order to come up with relevant capabilities. Now, those arguments about the military, the divide in military might, that cast doubt on the future of transatlantic cooperation also ignore the tremendous potential complementarities of the EU soft and the US hard power and capabilities. As Chris Patton, one of my bosses in the Commission responsible for external relations, has noted, smart development must have at least as important a role as smart bombs in the international effort to combat terrorism. And you can see that in Afghanistan, for instance. Humanitarian and development aid, conflict resolution, and building effective state structures in unstable regions are issues on which the EU focuses its common foreign policies and to which it devotes very substantial resources, by far the most in the world. We account for about 55% of world totals in overseas development assistance, more than 3 times the United States contribution, which is at 16% of the total. In these and other areas, the EU brings substantial added value to our global partnership with the US. And as Chris Patton said the other day, would we be better off, would the world be better off, if instead of spending those 55% of official development aid, we would spend it on military capabilities? Would we then together have a more effective toolbox to deal with the issues? Probably you need both, and that's where the complementarity comes in. Now, there is a real danger to round this argument off for the concept of partnership, which I talked about, to fade from the radar screen of the political class, as has been largely the case, which all those will find out who read the recently published document about the United States National Security Strategy, where the European Union almost does not exist except only on trade. It is, of course, the European Union's responsibility to do its homework, to get its act together in developing its own structures and capabilities, and I can say only that we will continue to meeting that challenge. Now, trade and investment have long been regarded as the cornerstone of the transatlantic partnership. Increasingly, our bilateral economic cooperation determines the well-being of the entire global economy, and this is not surprising given the sheer size of our respective economies. Euroland, which are the 12 member states out of the 15 sharing a single currency, now encompasses more than 300 million consumers. With the broader EU membership, 380 million strong in purchasing power, and the pending enlargement and regional free trade arrangements, which I already mentioned, producing a greater European economic zone of almost 1 billion people. And this means that the United States and the European Union are the true two locomotives worldwide to pull off the global economy, and they are the key to global economic recovery. Let me give you one or two other figures. Combined European Union and U.S. GDP is around 56% of the world's total, 56%, though we only constitute 10% of the world's population. We command over 40% of world trade between us, and no fundamental progress can be made on global trade issues without the European Union and the United States working together. And as impressive already as these figures are, if you look at our bilateral trade relationship, it is a $3 billion a day relationship, because trade in goods, in services, and foreign investment together account for $1 trillion a year, which makes a $3 billion a day relationship. And many of those exchanges already across the Atlantic are not only intra-industry, but intra-firm, intra-companies, which make those companies very strong stakeholders of our system. As another member of the European Commission I'm working for, Pascal Lamy, said the other day, the EU and the US are the two elephants of the multilateral trade system. Working together, we can help convince other partners to accomplish great things. If we quarrel with each other, then only healthy fees are being gained by law firms in Washington and Brussels, which is not bad. But they tarnish the big picture. And therefore, what we need to do in the area of trade and economics is to allow these two very convinced interlocutors, Pascal Lamy and the U.S. Trade Representative Bob Zoellick, who is one of the best connoisseurs of Europe in the U.S. government, they have established a very strong working relationship, and they're working at the same time at three levels: to manage our bilateral issues, to look at what we can do in the regional framework, and to work on global issues. They are determined to finish the agenda of Doha by the end of 2004, because this is the end of the mandate for both, for the Commission and for the present administration. Now, of course, we have disagreements, and everybody can read about it, whether it's FSCs, GMOs, or as some people say, beef, banana, Boeing. So there are a number of issues out there. It's not surprising that we have these disagreements, because we have such a huge relationship. And the challenge, therefore, is not having disagreements, but the challenge is to manage them in a responsible and solution-orientated measure. Now, everything I have said about the EU-US is, of course, also true for Utah. And be not surprised when I say that Utah has a substantial stake in the growing economic relationship with the European Union. In 2001, for example, Utah's exports to the EU totaled as much as the exports of this state to Canada and Japan together. And when it comes to foreign direct investment, the European Union is the source of almost 80% of all foreign direct investment coming into this state. The result of that is that around 30,000 jobs in the very high end, the very highly skilled and well-paid sectors are being directly depending on exports and to and investment from Europe. Now let me say a few words about my second part, will be much shorter, about the European Union agenda. Not that that agenda is shorter, but I want to leave some time for discussion. There are two basic issues out there, and it is part of my job inside and beyond the Beltway to explain this to the many interlocutors on the American side. There is a profound historic change happening in Europe. It has already started 50 years ago, has reached the point where we are today, and it will go on over the next decades. Now, the most immediate tasks which we have are a combination between enlargement and deepening. And you will very often find these two notions as being the name of the game. Enlargement, because there are many new candidate countries knocking at our door, and the European basic treaties in the 50s and 60s were made for other European countries to be able to join. And we have considered it under the Delors Commission not only as a priority to create the internal market for the present members, but to prepare the new candidate countries which were on the other side of the Iron Curtain for many years for membership. And this is more than just negotiating Europe agreements. It's more than just lowering barriers to trade. It is also to inject some of the resources into a process where we help these countries to acquire administrative capacities, to be able to finance the basic infrastructure needs when it comes to transport, to energy, to the environment, and the rest. And now we have reached a stage where before the end of this year, we hope that with 10 of those countries, we will be able to come to an end when it, as far as the accession negotiating process is concerned. These are the 3 Baltic states, the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, Malta, Cyprus. We came to the conclusion, together with Romania and Bulgaria, that these 2 countries will probably need a few more years before they will be able to join the European Union. And enlargement will not come to a final end then. There will be more enlargement. But the question whether we can afford more members will have to depend on the capacity of the European Union to maintain the dynamism and the momentum of its own decision-making process. And to find out whether we will be able, and on the basis of what we want to reinforce our own system, a constitutional convention has been called together half a year ago. They started their work. And their task is to define the future shape of the European Union, which will embrace 25 or more members. The convention, somewhat like the 1787 meeting of the American founding fathers in Philadelphia, is charged with making proposals to adapt an existing political system which was originally designed for 6 member states and now has 15, to the changing circumstances. And this includes important questions like the division of power between the European Union and member state levels, creating a more readable constitution, increasing the efficiency and accountability of the decision-making process, and many other questions. The system must enable our union to work with more member states without diluting our own process. So widening and deepening, as I said, are the names of the game, and we are conscious when doing so. We start already from a very high level. We are the 2nd largest free market economy in the world. We have a single currency, the euro, which is the 3rd largest currency in the world after the Chinese and the Indian currencies and before the dollar. And this euro has caught up with the dollar a wide gap which still exists when it comes to the question how many countries outside the system use the currency as a reference currency, when it comes to the question of reserve currencies. But I'm sure that the euro will gain in importance, and not only for business and other purposes, but for all of you when you travel to Europe. And you will find out how more easy it is now to spend money in different member states. Myself to that, I hope, still short overview, but an academic lecture always takes a certain minimum amount of time. And let me simply rehearse my basic credo, which is that something which President Bush articulated in his own way at the recent EU-U.S. summit when he said, the more Europe's unity grows, the more it is capable in partnership with the United States to deal with a broad range of bilateral, regional, and international issues. So let's conclude that we live in an interdependent world, that there are many threats and risks out there, that the basic challenge is to make the globe a safer and more prosperous place, and that it is the main responsibility of the new Europe and the new world, the United States, to work together on these issues. And there was nobody better than John F. Kennedy, who 40 years ago encapsulated that in a very far-sighted speech in the Hall of Independence in Philadelphia on the 4th of July, 1962, when he talked about a future transatlantic partnership and the need for a declaration of interdependence between the new Europe and the United States when the new Europe will be able to get its act together, which we are still on the move to do. So Europe is, all in all, a moving target. Those who want to join us, like the Olympic Games, 10 years ago, you could win a gold medal on the high jump with a given performance. 10 years later, you need to jump much higher in order to win the gold medal. And so, increasingly, it will be difficult to join the European Union, and therefore we must help countries who have to develop their capacities first to do so. I'm convinced that the new transatlantic agenda and the transatlantic relationship will test the many challenges of times. And let me express the hope that some of you in this room here, interested in international relations, will provide a larger room in your own studies and perhaps in your professional activities later on to this very fascinating subject. And maybe one of the future U.S. ambassadors of the European Union is right sitting in this room. So good luck. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes remaining if you'd like to ask questions. The ambassador will be willing to.
You too.
I have a question about the euro. Do you feel that countries that join the European Union and they accept that currency, that they're sacrificing a bit of nationalism and patriotism?
Well, nationalism we are not after at all. Patriotism would be good for the European Union to have some of it. Sometimes traveling this country and seeing all the flags outside there, I'm saying to my wife, if we had 5% of that patriotism, then I would have no doubt the European Union exists in the mind of everybody. So it's not about nationalism or about patriotism. It's about losing sovereignty, as you said. But to give you an answer by quoting somebody else, before the single currency, the euro, somebody asked some fellow Europeans, where is your sovereignty? For instance, talking to a French colleague, where is your sovereignty when the German Bundesbank raises interests and the French central bank just has to follow? And the problem about sovereignty, and not only in this area, is an increasing problem, a dilemma, because the less there is de facto, the more people speak about it de jure. And there's a gap between the perception and the realities. Now, the European Union is about pooling sovereignties. And those sovereignties which member states pool and decide that their common institutions, the European Commission, the European Council, European Parliament, European Court of Justice should exercise, those parts of sovereignty are not anymore available at the national level. And the same happened to the sovereignty of minting money. But of course, this goes to the heart of sovereignty, to have a currency. And the fact that the single currency, the euro, has been so successfully introduced for more than 300 million people, and in the meantime there are 44 countries outside those 12, who are using the euro as a reference currency, as many countries use the dollar as a reference currency, means that we have made a very decisive step on something which another president of the Commission, Mr. Hallstein, who was a university professor, by the way, and made famous Georgetown lectures about the European Union in the early 60s, which inspired President Kennedy for his speech in Philadelphia. Well, President Hallstein said, this is what it's all about. And he would not have believed, perhaps in the early 60s, that we would be able to introduce a single currency, which is a very, very decisive step. Now, his problem was, will this European Union process any time in the future become irreversible? And a single currency is an irreversible act. Because if those countries would decide today to abandon the single currency and reintroduce their national currencies, I don't know what would happen on the international exchange markets. Please. There's a micro coming.
Okay. With the increase in the sovereignty of the EU, what would you view the future of the two seats of Britain and France on the UN Security Council? Would it be proper that as it becomes multilateral action that they forfeit one of the seats?
Well, I very much share the logic of your question. But let me say that the success of the European integration process is very much based on the fact that we make one step after the other. And we decided not to make step 50 before step 2. So what you are referring to will happen one day. But if we would ask for this to happen tomorrow, we would create more obstacles than we would create allies for the European integration process.
How would you respond to the view of some critics that the development of the ESDP and the Rapid Reaction Force is rather than an effort towards cooperation, but an effort to chip away at U.S. hegemony, moving more towards competition than cooperation?
I'm not quite sure I caught the essence of your question. When you say competition, what do you mean?
A bipolar world rather than a unipolar world. An attempt to rival U.S. military power rather than to aid U.S. military power.
Well, I mean, of course, if another guy comes up with capabilities, there's a certain rivalry of capabilities. But the rivalry is not really the first problem, maybe the last problem, if one uses badly the various capabilities. My point was to say that what the European Union and the United States need to do is to organize the complementarity of their toolboxes. Now, you could argue theoretically, then let the United States have the hammer of the toolbox. The hammer is the military. Well, we are saying not every problem is a nail, by the way. And this is why you need other instruments in the toolbox. And let the Europeans have the other, the soft capabilities. If we would do so, we would in fact worsen the kind of perception gap which already is there in the persons of people like Bob Kagan or others who write about Mars and Venus. So it would not be good for a healthy relationship of one having nothing and the other one having all, in both cases. What would the United States do if they had no capacity of nation building? Just throw bombs on every place in the world and then let the others do the rest of the business? What we need is, we need to agree on what we want to achieve. So we need a much more adult, mature consultation process on the objectives of our foreign policies. Once we agree on it, then we need a complementarity of the toolbox. And of course the US will have a higher degree of using military power and the Europeans a higher degree of using the soft power. But both need something of both, because there may be situations like in the Balkans where the Europeans should not wait until the Uncle Sam is ready to intervene before taking things in hand. And the example of Milosevic has shown that in certain instances you can only convince other people if you have a credible threat, a big stick behind the back. And this is where the Rapid Reaction Force comes in. So it is not in order to be a rival, it is in order to be a good partner, that we need to do that. And of course, the basic concept of partnership is therefore the essential thing to agree on. If we had nothing in common and we would just compete in creating capabilities, we could easily get into loggerheads about certain issues. So all this system I was talking about requires a high maturity in managing each other's toolboxes.
Time for one more question.
Well, there were two questions in that row. Maybe we should take them. Start with you and then you.
I was just wondering if, in your opinion, there's an overlap between the role of NATO and the role of the ESDP.
Well, that's an easy question now because my answer, in fact, was already given. When I talk about transatlantic relations, there are two, from the American point of view, two pillars to that. One is the NATO alliance, where the United States is a member. And by the way, it's not just a member, it's the boss. And then there is the EU-U.S. relationship, where the United States is not a member and therefore not the boss, and where we have to find our own identity. The answer to how to manage that in an overall relationship is to identify the European Union as such more clearly within the North Atlantic Alliance. So what we need to end is a situation where our member states accept that they have full sovereignty when they meet in the Council of Ministers, and when they go a few hundred meters further down the road in the same capital, Brussels, to meet as a NATO council, they feel as if nothing else existed around them anymore, and they are fully sovereign again. So a United States which would promote that perception of our member states would be an unhelpful partner for building the European Union. On the other way around, if we, and we are about to do that in Brussels right now, find the right modalities of allowing the European Union to bring in its own capabilities, either together with NATO, or if NATO decides not to intervene in an issue where the Europeans feel they have to do it on their own, then we have the right relationship, and there will be no rivalry, and we need complementarity of the toolbox in order to be able to do so.
Thank you. My question is actually, you mentioned that Cyprus is a candidate for EU admission, and I was wondering if you think that the EU will be able to solve the split on Cyprus between the Turkish and the Greek Cypriots, and also if you see Turkey at any time in the future gaining EU membership.
Well, to start with the last question, this is an issue on which a final decision cannot be made today. You know that in order to become a member of the European Union, you have fulfilled what we call since 1993 the Copenhagen criteria. And the first one is the political. It's about your political system. Are you a democracy which fulfills the basic expectations we have towards a democratic system? And Turkey does not yet fully fulfill that. They have made a lot of progress. But just to mention one issue, the role of the military in the democratic decision-making process still is a huge role. And I have a good friend in Turkey who is Kemal Dervish, who was the vice president of the World Bank, and we both shared together the first donor conferences on Bosnia and the Balkans. He is now one of the leading figures in Turkish politics, and he would easily agree to that. He would have a very firm expectation that one day Turkey could join, but he would understand that there are still a number of things on the road which have to be removed in terms of obstacles. On the other hand, Turkey is already very much in the European process because it's the only country, and it's a big country, 65 million people, it's a huge economy, which has a customs union with the European Union. And having a customs union means that everything already has been done concerning internal market. Many things have been done because you need to approximate legislation and not just to do away with tariffs and to have a common external tariff. So we are in a kind of transition with Turkey, and the final decision will have to be taken on both sides also in terms of what is your own identity, how do you see your role? Will Turkey really, like Luxembourg, join a group where it relinquishes huge parts of its sovereignty, or will it want to play a role both in Europe and in the Caucasus and Central Asia, and therefore retain some freedom of action, like Russia, the same situation. So therefore, a final decision about membership, which is participation in the decision-making process, having ex-members of parliament, having a member of the commission, and so on. That issue will remain to be answered for some time. We have accepted Turkey as a candidate country, but we have not yet opened negotiations on accession with Turkey. And of course, Cyprus is, in a way, a part of the conundrum. We hope that the perspective of membership is an important lubricator to come to a political solution in Cyprus. And there's still some hope that this may happen before the end of the year, after the elections in Turkey early next month.